one of the only ways where black people get to play the lead is literally where there is no white competition.
It's not like Leonardo DiCaprio could play Nelson Mandela.
But movie critics say the shortage of African-American roles that Dandridge witnessed in the 50s is still a problem today.
For much of its history, Hollywood has excluded black voices both on screen and in positions of power. And yet, in the last 30 to 40 years, black filmmakers and performers have achieved unprecedented visibility and commercial success. But this raises an important question. Does this success occur through strategic negotiation of a system still shaped by structural racism? Essentially, to what extent is Hollywood still racist today? In 2015, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite drew attention to the Academy's lack of racial diversity, and at that point, about 3,000 Oscars had been awarded, but less than 40 had gone to black artists. And since then, the number has increased and some progress has been made, with the number of African Americans who have won Oscars now standing at 80. But the awards are symbolic and they represent recognition, not equality. So when Professor Herman Gray says that industries manage race through visibility rather than structural change, what he means is that Hollywood can put more black people on screen without actually giving black people real power behind the scenes. Now let's talk about black male authors as system disruptors. We'll start with Spike Lee. Do the Right Thing was a landmark success for black cinema, proving commercial viability for complex black narratives and challenging these expectations. Tricky Moral Resolution confronted audiences with racial tension, anger and contradiction. Malcolm X was another extremely powerful example, which reclaimed black political history. However, there still remains stigma within Hollywood that casting opportunities are limited for ethnic minorities. White characters are typically treated as the default option, while black characters are seen as specific and historical or political. So, does a black character in a story always need to be justified? Film critic Gil Robertson noted Leonardo DiCaprio could never play a figure like Nelson Mandela, not because of talent, but because whiteness functions as neutrality. John Singleton's Boys in the Hood was a deeply personal story of youth, masculinity and systematic violence rooted in the lived experience. Singleton became the first black director nominated for Best Director at the Oscars. Yet Hollywood's embrace of this film reveals an interesting pattern. Black stories are often accepted when they can be framed as social problems. This is when they involve crime, poverty and violence, rather than directly challenging power structures themselves. Will Smith quickly became one of Hollywood's most bankable stars by being universally appealing. He was funny, charismatic, non-threatening. Whilst his early success in his music and acting career arguably reflects a version of blackness that felt safe for mass audiences, one that didn't disrupt the status quo.
In 1990, E.T. made the first of 17 set visits with a then 21-year-old Fresh Prince.
I'm here all day, acting silly, eating with people I have fun with, enjoy being around.
The Fresh Prince was different to his Hollywood films, where being a black man didn't demonstrate the same politics that they used to. To move beyond these limitations, many had to find new strategies. Introducing the Trojan Horse strategy. One example is Donald Glover, who famously pitched Atlanta as a conventional comedy to the networks. What emerged instead was a surreal, politically sharp and deeply critical of American race relations series. He Trojan horsed the industry by disguising racial content with familiar form. Another similar pattern that seems to be popular with the networks was this formula of having a white savior in films and programs. Many films and programs classically center the narrative on a white middle-class protagonist in order for the show to gain network approval. Orange is the New Black famously did this and then gradually shifted their focus towards women of colour, queer inmates, and the corruption within authority. Ryan Coogler's Black Panther followed a similar logic. It was a superhero film first, and then a deeply political mediation on black identity, colonialism, and power. Sinners is another critical mention. And Jordan Peele's Get Out transformed horror into racial critique. Familiar genres allowed racial ideas to pass through the corporate gates. And as Bell Hooks describes, through the concept of oppositional gaze, black creators and audiences learned to look back at dominant images and subvert them. In very simple terms, black filmmakers learned the rules of Hollywood and deliberately bent them to break them from within the inside. Get Out looks like a horror film, but it's really about racism. Black Panther looks like a Marvel blockbuster, but it's really about colonialism and black power. And that's the oppositional gaze in action. Another really interesting idea from Herman Gray says that market logic determines which racial stories circulate. So Hollywood doesn't ask, is this story important? It asks, will this story sell? Together they suggest that Hollywood decides which black stories are allowed to be made based on money, not fairness. Black stories often need a genre hook or a white entry point or a famous star or some universal angle, but films like Sinners was a great example of how that subverted both Hollywood and audiences' expectations of what would sell. Essentially, this is what describes a Trojan horse strategy. Despite an arguably progressive infiltration of the system, major limitations still remain. There are still remarkably few female black directors receiving the same recognition and prestige as their male counterparts. Even when black women's stories are told, like these examples, authorship and power often remain male-dominated. Cultural critic Michelle Wallace argues that black women in media are frequently confined to narratives of respectability, endurance and suffering. Very rarely are they allowed anger, sexuality or political radicalism. Maybe the solution to the gender equality within Hollywood is a matter of disguising the topic at large to gain sponsorship and collaborators, as there's clearly a modern demand for original stories that haven't been heard or stories that are going to surprise audiences. Without coming to a solidified conclusion that Hollywood is directly racist, box office scores demonstrate that black cinema is successful, and contemporary audiences are starting to yearn for originality as they begin to grow bored of the expected.